Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the From Adversity to Abundance podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Bateman. I'm thrilled today to have with us Dave Van Horn. Dave, how are you doing today?
Unbelievable. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. So Dave is the founder of PPR Capital Management and also the executive director, and we can get into that later. And for the listener out there, I have a lot of respect for Dave. I've followed Dave through the years and certainly the 5 or 6 years that I've been in the note investing space, but even before that through Bigger Pockets and some other avenues. But I know you've had a lot of adversity and a lot of abundance in your life, Dave, and we're gonna get into that. So for the listener out there, why don't you drill down a little bit more on some more context as far as who you are and what you're up to today?
Yeah, sure. Like I said, you mentioned I'm executive chairman of PPR. So, I run the board and oversee the CEO. We have a new CEO of PPR. Up until recently, though, I was president and CEO for the last several years, and we just celebrated 15 years of PPR. We were a PPR note company. Today, we're PPR Capital Management. So, been a name shift and a brand shift, and things are good. So we're excited. And we don't just do notes and mortgages anymore. We also do some commercial real estate as well. So our funds, we have a fund that's real estate backed assets. It's a little more diversified than it was when we started out. So that's pretty much. And I came from the real estate world. Previous to that, I was a contractor. Over the years, I've done several things. I've had various licenses, real estate license, insurance license, was a property manager, owned a title company for a while. So I've done a lot of different things over the years. But in recent years was mostly a fund manager and ran a company and scaled it and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's you're humble. And I think you're selling it short slightly. And hopefully I did say executive chairman, not executive director, but regardless, so talk to the listener about kind of what's a little bit more about the size of PPR or kind of some of the funds you've managed in recent years, to give a little bit more context.
Sure. I'm trying to think, how many funds have we had since the beginning? 9 or 10, I would guess. I'd have to go look. We have a lot of entities. There's probably 50 entities, We're not a super large shop personnel wise. We're around 30 people. But we do have some JV partners that have sizable shops as well. So we have a JV partner on the West Coast that has a significant number of people. They also have a trade desk in New York. And then we also have some other JV partners on the commercial real estate side, and some of their teams might be a dozen or 15 people, that kind of thing, with folks that we partner with. So we would probably have more employees, if we did everything ourselves. We may have 150 employees at that point. But as far as assets under management, we're in the 700, 800 million range. And private equity wise, we're probably just under 300 million if private equity. But we recycle a lot of that money. So it's a little bit different than, if we were just, say, a commercial real estate shop where, it's kind of like you put money to work and you wait. We're constantly probably on about 75% of our business, the money's moving, rapidly. It's going out, it's coming back, it's going out, it's coming, that kind of thing, which is a little bit different than, a typical real estate fund that's
sure,
more, complacent or whatever.
More static. Yeah.
Yeah, more static.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And I remember.
But as far as assets, that's a good question. Most of them today are in Georgia, and we have some multifamily. It's around 1,000 units, mostly in Georgia and Texas. We're kind of newer to the space, but loan wise, yes, definitely well over 12,000 probably since we started. It's common for us to probably buy about 300 to 400 million a year. We sell a lot of REOs, probably several hundred REOs a year. Just to give context. So,
sure.
And that's
Absolutely.
nationwide mostly, to be honest. The commercial real estate's typically in the Sun Belt or high growth areas or maybe a
Hmm.
couple tertiary markets, but it's kind of where we're focused, and
Yeah.
it's more of a diversification type play.
Yeah. And you, like you said, you moved into that a little bit more recently.
Yep.
Um, and that's one of the things I remember Chris 70 and I had you on our Good Deeds podcast a few years ago. And I remember that one of the big lessons that I took from that was, you said, just tell me what the rules are and I'll figure out a way to win. So I remember kind of what my biggest takeaway was flexibility and adding, tools to your tool belt, if you will, so that no matter what happens with the economy, no matter what happens with legislation, you can react and still profit and still do good. So hopefully we can dive into that in a little bit. But
Sure.
as far as adversity goes, let's jump into your backstory. I know before we hit record, we touched a little bit on a couple of types of adversity that you've faced. Why don't you start where you'd like to, as far as in your history, and we'll pick it up from there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think everybody has some adversity, but then again, I'm kind of grateful for where I am too. So I feel blessed, and things can always be worse, right? But I think we
Absolutely.
all go through adversity, and I think a lot of life is how we respond to things. Definitely one of the biggest challenges for me, especially growing up, was I was one of six kids, and my dad left my mom when I was 8,
Hmm.
and that was pretty traumatic. So what it's like when we were blue collar type family,
Mhm.
but when you take the breadwinner out of the picture, things go downhill
Mhm.
very quickly.
Sure.
And then also my family had gotten split in half.
Hmm.
So I had 3 older sisters and 2 younger brothers, and our family literally got chopped in half.
Hmm.
And eventually my sisters went to live with my father, which at the time they probably thought it was a good idea, but it was a really bad idea.
Hmm.
And then their lives were, dramatically impacted. Um,
Hmm.
I had one sister that went to prison for, sentenced to
Wow.
15 years in prison. I had a sister that went to reform school. I had a sister that got, uh, you know, she was a mom very early.
Hmm.
Those kinds of impacts.
Sure.
Um, and my one sister was, a heroin addict.
Hmm.
So a lot
Wow.
of things were negative from that
Yeah.
divorce, so to speak. And I was fortunate to be on the right side of that. A couple of
Hmm.
interesting things come out of that was not everybody fares the same way. Like an impact of something like that. To look at me probably on the surface, you're like, oh, Dave has it halfway together. He looks
Right.
fairly
Yeah.
normal.
Exactly. Yeah.
He's done okay, but not everybody came out of that okay. Is what you learn.
Sure.
Not everybody responds the same way.
Sure.
Um, a couple weird things that happened. One was like me and my siblings, we never fight. You know how
Hmm.
you'll see cases where people will, haven't talked to my sister or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Me and my siblings, we literally, there's no argument. There's
Hmm.
no we because I think because we were separated,
I
which is
see.
a weird dynamic, right? When you think about it, so it's kind of interesting. Now there
Yeah.
was a time period where I hadn't spoken to my father in a good 5-year period. Now most people can't envision not speaking to their father for 5 years, right?
Sure.
So later on, I was able to actually reconcile with him and
Hmm.
basically kind of forgive type situation before he passed. But the whole time as a kid, though, it was a different road, right? Because what I quickly realized, even in fourth grade, I had my first job.
Hmm.
You had to do it on your own. There was no backstop. There was no safety
Hmm.
net. Now it did give you trust issues, like where
Hmm.
you were reluctant because if you can't trust your parent, who can you
Who
trust,
can you
right?
trust?
That's
Sure.
kind of what
Absolutely.
that's kind of what ends up happening.
Yeah.
And then there's yeah, there's weird things that happen that you can't do that normal kids can do. Now it's different when your parent, I think, passes away, because that's like can't be helped kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, it's just a different vibe, you know what I mean, than it is in a case of, you know, you wonder, did your parent want you or not? Those kinds of
Sure.
things, and it's a harder thing.
Yeah, it
But
gets to
that was
a bit.
probably the big one,
Sure.
that was early on, that had an impact in everything from my education to my, basically had to bootstrap whatever you did.
Yeah.
So,
No, I appreciate you sharing because and again, I know you've talked on lots of other podcasts about how to invest in notes and how to, and your successes and things. And what we're trying to do is highlight, some of the pain that people go through and to highlight the fact that you can get through it and you can pull out lessons, and not to say you'd like that, if you had to do it over again, that you'd want that it to go that way. But sounds like you've developed at least a work ethic and a good relationship with your siblings through that
yeah,
challenging
no,
time.
it's great. And the other weird thing that happened, even though I was like a middle child, I
Hmm.
felt like the oldest of the
Hmm.
family I was in because of the way it was. And then
Hmm.
all of a sudden it was almost like I played a bigger brother, father type role in a
Hmm.
way. It
Hmm.
kind of, that probably wouldn't have happened if the family was all together. You know what I mean? It's just
Sure.
like
Yeah.
looking back on it. So it did change some things.
Sure.
But yes, the good news is everybody's pretty good, and for the most part, today.
Hmm.
But not everybody comes out of that unscathed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I did better than some of the other folks. That's really what
So
it was.
so why would you say that is? I mean, I know there are factors beyond your control, but looking back, why would you say you did better than the others did?
I mean, it's a good question. Well, some I think some people, I don't want to sound bad against my siblings. I
Sure,
mean,
sure,
some
sure.
people have more of a blame or a victim
Yeah,
type of mentality.
sure.
Um, Maybe I had less of that.
Right.
And then I
Gotcha.
kind of figured things were on my own. And then I had some lucky things. You make your own luck. And I always worked really hard. Like my mom was a very good work ethic, very
Hmm.
spiritual woman.
Hmm.
And no matter what our jobs were, we did our best, and
Hmm.
that kind of mentality.
Sure.
We were always on time. We could be poor, but we could be clean, things like
Hmm.
that are just ingrained in you. And you were on, you were honest, and you had
Sure.
integrity and things like that,
Yeah.
even though you didn't have much. So those kinds of things carry forward a lot. And,
Yeah. Makes
things
sense.
just, I did get fortunate. I was in, I had really good grades. And when I was in eighth grade, my mom kind of conned me into taking
Hmm.
an entrance exam to a private school. And I go, Mom, we can't afford to go there, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, don't worry. Just see how you do. You won't get in. Don't worry. Just see how you do. And you kind of know where that went. I ended up getting a 4-year academic scholarship, and that dramatically changed the trajectory of my life, because
Sure.
all of a sudden I was just surrounded by wealthy folks, and
Yeah.
it was a very accelerated program, and it got me out of my comfort zone. It was actually in the next state over. It was, out of
Okay.
the neighborhood. It was out of the, the
Yeah.
normal school, and
Sure.
it dramatically changed things. Just that
Right.
one scenario, So
No, and I personally, I don't believe in self-made millionaires or, because we all have some kind of help along the way or some kind of luck.
sure.
You can debate that all day long. So maybe you got a lucky break there, but at the same time, you had really good grades. So you wouldn't have gotten in had you not done the work in front of you. So, I think there's a lesson in
Yeah, it was a
that as well.
combination. I mean, yeah, for sure. And then, once I got through there, then it was all right. How do I get to college? And I'm kind of embarrassed of this, but it took me 5.5 years to get a 4-year degree.
Hmm.
But I paid the first couple years out of my pocket. I went to a state college. I actually had gotten into Drexel, but I couldn't afford to go to Drexel really.
Hmm.
I'm from the Philadelphia area, so
Hmm.
I had gone to a state school in Pennsylvania, which was obviously less, and um, I had to take out some student loans to finish, but I was trying to pay it as I went, kind of thing. Which looking back wasn't so bad, but
Hmm.
it wasn't like I was, some of the wealthier kids in school. Obviously, they
Sure.
could study more, or they didn't have to work as much. I was actually working 4 days a week and going to college.
Mm.
So it was
Wow.
that's one of the advantage that I think some like when I look at my kids and my grandkids, they're
Hmm.
pretty well off. They don't have that kind of adversity, right? To where they,
Sure.
have to take out a lot of debt, or they can't,
Hmm.
they don't have to work and then wake up and go to school and try to study and cram. And life was much harder. In fact, I almost flunked out, which it's kind of ironic now when you look back and you're like, your report card's your bank account when you get older, but
Right. Yeah.
but
I,
but when you're young, a lot is meant, what's your degree, what's
yeah.
your
Your grades and your
education level, what's your
sure.
that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Looking back, it's nobody walks around and asks me what my GPA was, right? But
Yeah,
um
no one asked me to see my report card or anything these
right.
days, which is fine
Yeah.
because I don't know that I care that
Yeah.
much.
So no, I think a lot of what you've said already, a lot of people can relate to. Definitely sounds like you've overcome a lot from your childhood, and you've touched on it. I mean, it's all about how you respond to adversity. Um, so walk us through from college. Yeah, I know you have a long story as far as all the businesses you've run and everything like that, and startups and everything. But walk us through kind of from college through today, highlighting more of the adversity that you've come across.
Yeah, sure. I had met my wife when I was like 19. We've been married almost 40 years. But my wife had gotten pregnant before I finished school, so it was really tough getting done. And then when I got done school, I couldn't even afford an apartment. I had a business degree, which technically were a dime a dozen at the time. And imagine going to college, taking out loans, working real hard, going for
Hmm.
5.5 years. You get done and
Hmm.
you can't get a job. And I was, yeah, imagine that, right?
Yeah.
And then I was working in construction, and I couldn't afford an apartment, so I had to move in with my mom. And we were splitting the bills, and it was really grueling. I'd come home from work all filthy and everything. And one day my mom says, "Well, why don't you try like real estate?" And that's what I did. I started going to school at night and became an agent, and then was working towards my broker's license. And I was handy because I had worked in construction and I had access to the MLS, but I didn't have capital. And I was taking an investment course to get my broker's license, and the guy teaching it said, "How many people in here have credit cards?" And we all raised our hand, and he goes, "How many people in here buy houses with credit cards?" And all the hands went down. And I remember going home that night and telling my wife, I go, "I think we're going to buy houses with credit cards." And she was like, "That's not going to affect my ability to go to the mall, is it?" And I'm like, "No, that's a different credit card. Don't worry about
Different.
it."
All
And
good.
I don't recommend doing this, by the way. So hopefully this doesn't
Yeah.
translate like that. But this was prior to cash advance fees and things like that. And what I ended up doing was I would write a credit card check to myself, pay cash for a property, fix it up, move a tenant in, refinance the house, pay back the credit card. And next thing you know, I bought probably 10 or 12 houses like that. And over time, they kept upping my limits. Next thing you know, I had like a 500,000 in credit card access. And I kept, and then I would continue to cash flow, and any money I pulled out on the refi was tax free. So I was
Hmm.
building some wealth and some cash flow, and then a few years went by. And next thing you know, I had a couple $1 million in equity, and then I ended
Wow.
up being a lender to other contractors. So
Okay.
that's kind of how I got into the note business initially. Was hard money, private money, lending back and forth to other like-minded folks like myself. We became basically banks for each other,
Hmm.
using our lines of credit on our properties and using our qualified plans, retirement
Yeah.
accounts, and things.
And I know you do have your book that goes into some detail
A little
on
bit
all
of
this
that
as well.
probably.
So, but did you have any kind of real estate mentor at that time, or how were you, besides before you got into the lending space and just, real estate in
I
general?
came through a weird place in the beginning because I came in as an agent. So,
Yeah.
and believe it or not, there were years, it was 1990, I was top agent in the company.
Hmm.
And there was like 250 agents and like
Hmm.
6 offices, that kind of thing. And so I did okay. It wasn't, but I also
Hmm.
worked as a
Hmm.
contractor full time while I was
Hmm.
an agent, which was a little bit crazy because I had the wrong, I didn't understand leverage. I thought if you worked harder, if you worked real hard, you did good no matter what. So the
Yeah,
more I worked, but you run out of capacity, and I
sure.
was probably older, 40s and 50s, before I realized it was all about leverage. And it's funny that you say coach and mentor. It was more in my later years. There were many years I've spent well over 100 grand on coaching and mentoring, in the hundreds of
Hmm.
thousands. So most people, it's funny if I speak in a room and I say, how many people in here spend more than 100 grand on coaching? Not too
Yeah,
many hands go up.
sure.
But it definitely changed the dynamics, especially when it came to leverage. Because my one coach that was his favorite question was, "What's the one thing?" Notice he didn't say 5 things. What's the one
Right.
thing that you're going to leverage that'll catapult you in the next 6 to 12 months in your business life or in your personal life too? And it could even be in your sports team you're coaching. It
Hmm.
could be any topic almost,
Hmm.
but there is typically one thing that'll really dramatically, move a needle or 10x or 100x something,
Hmm.
as opposed to a lot of things. And we all tend to get, caught in all the minutia.
Sure.
And
Absolutely.
it was a great mentoring and coaching experience from him. And that was a guy named Lewis Schiff who wrote the book. He's wrote several books, but one was
Hmm.
Business Brilliant. And he
Yeah.
was from Birthing of Giants in New York. And very sophisticated group. I was actually very small fish in that pond.
So now the leverage specifically in your case was other people's money. Is that what we're referring to, that you were able to use to
Well,
grow?
it can be yeah. I mean, at first you think that capital is definitely something we can all
Sure.
utilize or leverage, but it can
Yeah.
also be personnel and technology and
Sure.
education. And
Yeah.
typically what will happen is each quarter or each month or something, it could be a different thing, depending where your business is. Like, how there's like, I like to say there's 3 pillars to every business, right? There's
Yeah.
capital, there's sources of product, and then there's
Yeah.
scalability. And one of them is always screaming the loudest usually. And
Absolutely.
so those answers can shift, in my mind.
Sure. Yep.
So,
Makes
and,
sense.
and I'm not saying you can't leverage a couple things, but usually there's a needle mover that's really going to move the needle, and
Yeah.
it's almost like the book, The One Thing.
Yeah. Great book.
It's that kind of concept of, yeah, there's probably one thing that's really going to be dramatic.
Yeah. Like the 80/20 Pareto principle where you're
Yeah,
focusing
and
on the
that they
20%.
took that to another level too. They would do the 80/20 of the 80/20, the 4% rule, and you're
Okay.
like, okay, I gotta really zero in. I
Sure.
think that type of concept. And then the other one that was real big for me was focusing on what you do best and
Hmm.
getting out of some of the other stuff. And it took me a while because how like we like to all wear a lot of hats and think we're
Yeah.
important and we try
Right.
to do everything. Um, and one of the things I did in recent years was, how you take whether it's your Outlook calendar, your Google calendar, whatever, it doesn't really matter. I
Sure.
kind of took that and then I made like 3 columns, and I had, what I really love to do. I would do it almost for free, gives me joy. I
Hmm.
get great energy from it. I had that category. And then I had a category of stuff I can't stand doing. Why am I doing it? And then I had
Yeah.
that. Actually, the hardest category is the middle, which is stuff that you don't mind doing it, you're okay at it,
Right.
but it
You're
really
pretty
comes
good at it.
down to should you be doing it, and
Sure.
there's
How
a
much
lot
is
of
your
those
time worth?
things.
Yep.
Yeah. And then it's, you'll hear people say, time blocking and goal setting and all that,
Right.
but I don't know, I'm kind of getting to the point where my goal is to not have any goals or, The only meeting I want to be in is the one with no agenda, So it's
Absolutely.
funny. It's funny how that shifts, and what that's really saying. It doesn't mean I don't have goals. It just
Yeah.
means I don't have to have them. It's
Yeah,
a little different.
absolutely. No, it makes
That's a different thing, right?
total sense. I had James Harold Webb was a previous guest, and he has a phenomenal story, but we had a call after the podcast, and he said a similar thing where, I said, well, should we set another appointment for a call? And he said, I don't like to put things on my calendar these days. He said, just reach out
Yeah,
if you need something, and there was a lot of freedom and guess, just,
yeah. It's like the morning routine, right? Like I was, when I was obviously president and CEO, the
yeah,
routines were very, strict, regimented,
sure.
systematic, all that good stuff. And in recent times, not that I don't have routines, I do, but
Right.
like sleep's a real big thing for me these days. Another one
Yeah.
is I have like a almost like a no alarm clock policy, even though I get up the same time every day, which kind of sounds
Love it.
ridiculous. But I don't really even like an alarm. I mean, I hate it even to catch a plane or an airport. And I'm
Yeah.
very guarded with time and
Hmm.
phone. Like I haven't had a phone in my office in 5 years. Like if you look around, there's no phone in there. You
That's
can't really
fantastic.
call me, right? So I just
That's
you
great. I
can, of
love that.
course.
Oh,
I
right. I
you
can.
but you get what I mean. It's like
Yes.
it's very and I do have a morning routine, like same as everybody else, probably with
Sure.
exercise or reading and writing, and
Yeah.
we all have hobbies. And I'm fortunate; I have two real, grown adult children, two sons, and I have four grandkids, and three
Nice.
grandsons and a granddaughter. So they're a lot of fun.
Yeah.
You know,
No, and I'm sure
they could
your
be a
morning.
hobby in themselves, right?
Yeah, right. Absolutely. But your sounds like your morning routine, like, sounds like you do that because you recognize the value of that for your life and for others'
Yes.
lives as well. It's not because you're forced to do it.
No,
But
and I meditate. I'll do yoga once a week, just
nice.
stretch, and I do
Nice.
exercising and all that, and I do some intermittent. I like that.
Uh-huh.
I do like coffee.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I also, it is tough. Like I'm not yet the one meal a day guy yet. It's a noble goal.
Right. There's always another level.
Yeah, there's always
So
another level.
talk to us about, because you mentioned some adversity already on the growing up and the relationship side of things.
Yeah.
Talk to us about some of the other adversity, maybe financial, that you've faced, either in businesses or on the personal side.
Sure. I mean, most of the financial, if you really look at true adversity, it was obviously in those younger years because
Sure, absolutely.
it was more basic,
Yeah,
you got to take care of food and shelter and things like that.
yeah.
Later in life, probably the biggest thing was around the time I was 42. I had a painting company, and I had that for, let me see, a good 10 years. And then I had hurt my back, and it literally put me out of the business. I actually had to sell off contracts. I had to do all kinds of stuff, lay off employees at the peak, and I had 12 employees. And
Mhm.
I couldn't load trucks anymore. I couldn't physically work. I wasn't allowed to lift anything over 25 pounds. Thank God I had the ability to use my education and my
Your
brain and
brain.
my real estate background, because and at the time I guess I had around 20 properties. At one point I had gotten up to like 40 of my own places.
Hmm.
And if it wasn't for that, I would have been in a real predicament. But I couldn't do the physical work I used to do. And it
Mhm.
definitely, I shifted into real estate obviously, but life had to change. And so I was fortunate. At the same time, I was having problems with my
Mhm.
back, because I would get hurt and I'd be out for days. And
Mm.
what the lesson there was, the business revolved around me. And
Mhm.
then I realized if I ever have a business again, it's not going to revolve around me. And that's kind
Mhm.
of, when you see PPR, for example,
Yeah.
there's a lot of team behind me.
Right.
There's a lot of
Sure.
folks, partners. My
So
son works here. There's.
yeah, no, I mean, it's also impossible to scale if you're
Yes.
the key cog in the wheel. But so what did you do tactically at that point then? To when you, I guess when you started your next business, how did you approach that to make sure you weren't
Yeah,
the key player, if you will?
well, in the beginning, I was an agent, and what I did was, well, I was living off my properties. Obviously, I could do that, and then
Uh-huh.
but I started doing multiple streams of income at first. So I
Uh-huh.
had a title business. I used to, run mortgages through my wife. Even I did property management, and then I focused on investors. So if you were an investor of mine, you might buy 5 or 10 houses, and
Hmm.
then we would do multiple things for you.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah,
would get paid multiple times, not just the commission to sell you a property. And then I would
sure.
also be a leasing agent. And then I'd also, so I had this like
Hmm.
kind of a
Yeah.
snowball effect.
Yeah.
And I
Vertically
did that for a
integrated. Yeah.
while till the crash. And then that's when I entered, that's when
Okay.
we started PPR. And we were like, after the market crashed in '07, '08, we were like, all right, what side of the fence do we want to be on? It's going to be ugly for a while. And it really was ugly for realtors for a while.
Sure.
So we were like, my partner John was a mortgage originator. He was actually an investor friendly lender, and I was an investor friendly agent. And there was just no. I went from at Remax at the time. I was probably doing 75, 80 sales a year, easy. I
Mm.
dropped probably to 7. So
Wow.
it plummeted.
Yeah.
So it was a good thing that I did go into distressed debt. Now, from another financial adversity, though, was one of the parties that was initially teaching us the collection side of the business ripped us off to the tune
Interesting.
of several $1 million. And it took a long period of time to go to court. Actually, we got it back, but it was the lost use of the capital that was very painful. And it
Sure.
almost put us out of business.
So the opportunity cost of not having that capital at
Yeah,
that
not
time.
having the capital was luckily we had the skills to continue to raise capital and
Mm.
figured out our other ways. But basically, when someone does that to you,
Mhm.
they literally try to put us out of business.
So,
Um,
and
it's almost like the
obviously,
bad builder concept. You know how a builder has 25 or 30 subcontractors and their model is to pay no one, and then maybe one or two contractors will sue. They'll settle with one, and even
huh.
if they lost the case to the one, they didn't pay the other 25.
So it's still profitable, even though
It's
they got
very
sued.
profitable. To them, it's like a business thing, even though it's very unethical, right?
Right. I don't know how people sleep at night.
Oh, they're out there.
So, so tell me, you don't have to go into specifics, of course, but talk a little bit more about that as far as what was the relationship with this person again, and mainly for the
It
listeners so
was
that they
yeah, it
can
was someone
avoid.
that was selling us assets, and they were
Mhm.
helping us collect on the assets, things like that.
Mhm.
And we had put up some money to obtain assets, and then never
Mhm.
got the assets, right? And they
I
ran off
see.
with the money, and it's like, and then
Yeah.
you heard a song and dance and all that stuff for a long period of time, and then it was like sue me, and then suits take
Yeah.
years, and
Sure.
then eventually we got it, and yes, we got a little bit of interest, but the little bit of interest did not
Yeah. Compared to what
solve
you
for
would
the
have made,
impact it made.
right?
Yeah, it was it
Not
was it was
only
pretty devastating, actually.
sure the opportunity cost of the money, but also your time and energy that's
A lot of
focused on that.
energy focusing on the legal, the chasing, the
Mhm.
dealing with
So,
investors, the whole 9 yards,
do you have any lessons learned there that the listener could take away
right?
as far as
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, you're always, well, yeah, don't wait, right? It's just like if you're evicting a tenant, or,
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
homeowner's not paying, any of
Yeah.
those, the longer you wait, you're just making it worse. And so there's always, speed means a lot. Move
Sure.
quickly, right? Don't wait. There's no point in waiting. Um, I guess I don't know that you can become, say, a millionaire without losing some money somewhere,
Yeah.
right? I've had other cases where I lost, a 250,000 or a 500,000, even on a personal side in investing or something. But I don't think, I don't know what the odds are if someone becomes, say, a billionaire who
Yeah.
never lost $1 million or something. I just
Sure.
find it probably unlikely, that
Yeah.
that could even happen, because I'm not saying you want to go out and try to lose money. I don't mean it
Sure.
that way, but I think that's part of the learning piece of
Yeah.
it. I don't look at it as failure. I think I was just listening to Sarah Blakely was saying something like that when she
Okay.
was a kid, that you know, her father would say, so what do we fail at this week? And he'd high
Oh,
five
right,
them,
right.
you know,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
kind of thing. And it's because it's a learning experience. It's really not a failure, right? So
Sure.
it's back to kind of what we were talking about with the adversity piece, where it's like, you know, how do we respond to what happened? I
Absolutely.
know I see my son one time. Sometimes he gets bugged at that. He's like, "Aren't you worried about this in the news, or aren't you worried about that in the news?" And I'm like,
Right.
"No,"
No.
because it's how I respond to what, you know. Let me see what happens, and then I'll make my move. You know, it's
Yeah.
mean to sound that crazy, but it's kind of like that. It's I can't worry about what might happen. Now, I'm not saying I don't take any precautions. That would be foolish to say that, but
Sure.
I kind of see what shakes out, and then I adjust
No,
accordingly.
I
You know,
think
I don't.
that's a very valuable piece of wisdom, honestly. And that's been a common thread among a lot of the guests we've had on the show, as far as, not focusing on the big picture, meaning the things I can't control, as far as maybe
Right.
you take that information in, as far as you might use it in your analysis, but not overemphasizing that with regard to your stress levels and what
Yeah.
if this, what if that, what if that, what if this, and shifting from what if to even if has been a key
Yeah. Sure.
piece. But I know for me, years ago, I made a switch, and I turned off the news, the
Yeah.
cable,
News will do
network
that.
news.
Yeah.
It's like, and I stopped worrying about all that stuff, and I shifted to, okay, my father was also an agent. He still is, technically. My brother was a loan officer. I had title insurance experience. What are the strengths, or what are the team members around me that can help, move this thing forward, as opposed to, oh my gosh, like we're, I don't know, the next war or
Yeah. The
whatever. It's
world's
like,
caving in. Sure.
I mean, they're real problems, but I can't fix it. So,
Yeah, it doesn't mean
um,
you don't care, right? It's
right,
just you don't
right.
want to get caught up in it. And I agree with you. I'm not a big news person. It doesn't mean I
Mhm.
don't, you know. But here's what's funny: you hear about the stuff anyway, right? So it's kind of
Right. Yeah, it's gonna
it
find
finds
you
its way
anyway.
to you
Yeah,
anyhow. It might be a
yeah.
day later or something. But
No, but you're right about the point of, you probably shouldn't get into business if you're not willing to lose money, business or investing, because you're going to take your licks if you do enough deals, right?
yeah, I mean, I don't know the kind of the way. I mean, think about it. We all. I'm not saying I want to be, you know, not care about the investors or money or anything,
Sure.
but I also don't want to live a life of regret either. And it
Yep.
doesn't mean you're going to do things foolishly, but I think you have to. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? You know,
Yeah.
I don't know that you'll be where I was when I was 8.
Right.
I doubt it. You know, and
Sure.
the other thing is, even if you made your first million or whatever, 10 million, 100 million, you're not going to forget that as long as you have your mental capacities, right? You can lose everything tomorrow. You're going to know how to go back and do it again.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's kind of it's like I don't even worry about that kind of thing, you know,
Yeah.
or like I don't worry about money or anything. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, that it really is the, even if this happens, I can still point to my strengths and
just
skills. And
reinvent yourself and go back to
yeah.
whatever.
So then, before I get to some questions I have here, so you mentioned being a real estate agent for a while. You mentioned the painting business. You mentioned contracting, and then you mentioned the kind of the distressed debt space. Obviously,
Yeah.
that's what PPR is known for. And then you've gotten into more kind of commercial real estate more recently, and that type of thing. Have we checked all the boxes as far as the businesses you've started?
Yeah, I mean, the only weird thing about PPR really was it was an accidental business. It wasn't like it wasn't like there was a robust business plan. It wasn't like I bought a
Mhm.
franchise. Right? It was
Well, no, that's actually like, so
yeah.
talk about that, because, I think that does hold a lot of entrepreneurs back, because they think they need this 10-year, 20-year vision, and they don't take the next step.
Well, we actually have a 10-year vision now, but
Okay,
we
well,
didn't
you
in the
do
beginning.
now. You do now.
But the just to make people feel a little better. But in the very beginning, you know, it was, you know, I remember meeting with my partner, John, you know, I think we were at lunch in the area, you know, it was almost like the back of a napkin type idea. Like
Hmm.
he knew I raised money for commercial real estate before PPR. He's like, hey, why don't you raise money and I'll work the notes. And we actually had a short sale company And the sign on the front of the building was the shirt sale company, and the shirt sale company went out of business. And the notes were like in the back office and in
Okay.
one room, and that
Yeah.
business kind of took off. And it started out with our own money at first, and I was really an investor in the beginning. It was pretty cool to have cash flow without tenants and things like
Sure.
that, and it's passive, somewhat passive.
Yep.
So that part was intriguing and compelling and all. And then the fact that you could buy something at a discount with a high yield with collateral was kind of appealing, right? So,
Sure.
that's kind of what drew us in.
Yeah. Yeah. But so you kind of stumbled into it, and then it sounds like probably the market conditions helped,
Yeah,
to,
and then another thing that was adverse in the beginning, we started in an up market, and it was very scary because the market really crashed and all the equity fell out of your portfolio. So all of a
mm,
sudden, I forget how many million assets we had at the time,
mm-hmm,
but all of a sudden the equity went away. So you're
mm.
like, oh my gosh, if you had a bank mentality, you'd be like, we're
We're
done,
screwed.
we're
Yeah.
toast.
Yeah.
And what we found was that's not what happened, because equity didn't indicate outcome, and we weren't in a fire sale situation. So we're working through the assets.
Sure.
And what we learned was, as we bought new assets at better pricing, it was funny with the equity assets at the time, we were getting out of, I don't know, let's say it was 9 out of 10. When we were buying assets with less equity or negative equity, we were getting
Mm-hmm.
out of, call it 7 out of 10, right? But we were paying a third for the assets
Mm,
of what we
sure.
were paying, right? So
Right.
that data, that actually thing that, when the sky was falling or we thought the sky
Yeah.
was falling, was a blessing in disguise, because we grabbed data that enabled us to go out and buy what no one else wanted to buy, right? It was
Mm,
kind of like it
yeah.
reminded me when we would buy bankruptcy assets, the bank looks at them all as they're all bad and they put them in a
Sure.
bucket. We know statistically a third of them are good, and it's just which third. It was a very statistical business when we started. We were in junior liens when we started, but
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of interesting how that evolved. But that traumatic event of the market crashing, the equity falling, oh my gosh, the world's
Yeah.
coming to an end.
Right.
You guys, the portfolio is worthless. Yeah, it's worthless if you're forced to sell it, but we weren't.
And in fact,
And
you
and
turned,
there's a lesson in that. Like, everybody tends to go to the worst case scenario all the time, but that's not always what dictates outcome, right? So,
sure. Well, and I
yeah.
know being,
And you're seeing that in this market with mark to market on assets. The
mm-hmm,
mark to market valuations in the tank. It
mm-hmm.
doesn't really mean anything unless you're selling it today,
Yeah.
at a
Yeah.
fire
Yeah.
sale price, right? So,
Yeah. People say that with the stock market. Oh, I've lost all this money. It's like, well, no, you actually haven't. It's just that the number on the piece of paper
right.
says you have. Um, so, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean,
I'm not saying you want
um,
to be in that situation,
yeah, right.
but
But you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm in the NPL space, as well. And if you can buy at a much better price point, you have a lot more options, and you can even, it just gives you a lot more control and a lot more room for profit and a little bit more room for error, if you will. But
well, the
um,
pricing can adjust, and you can adjust your tactics too, right?
mhm,
Like in an up market where equity's up, deed and lieu could be popular. In a down market
mhm,
when there's no equity, deed and lieu is a bad
mhm,
idea. I mean, so
sure.
it's
Yeah, absolutely.
if you don't adjust, then
Yeah.
it's almost like I don't want to say shame on you, but it's kind of like
Yeah.
you need to
Um,
adjust.
so when you looking back, I mean, did you, as far as your business approach, your approach to all these businesses, at what point did you say, okay, I want these are all going to be kind of spokes on a wheel? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but did you, when you were starting out as an agent, I'm assuming you didn't know you'd have all these different types of related businesses, or have started them at some point. So was there a point where you said, okay, kind of residential and even commercial real estate is my focus, and I'm going to start a title business, or did it kind of just happen as you went along?
Well, at first it was like I think I saw Robert Allen speak, and he was
Okay.
pitching a
Yeah.
book, Multiple
Yeah.
Streams of
Yeah.
Income or something at
Yep.
the time.
Yep.
I was like, yeah, I can do that. I'm going to have, but what you quickly realize, it's not focused then,
Yeah.
and now you're doing a bunch of things. How well are you doing them? And you can only do
Sure.
them as good as you can handle it or something. And then the wheels
Yeah.
start to fall off. So I don't know that I would do that again. I'm probably
Hmm.
better off. And you see that today with a lot of real estate teams. You'll see the teams of
Hmm.
real estate people who probably maybe have done better than me, even because they might get someone that's an expert in listing versus an expert in selling or
Hmm.
an expert in property management. Sometimes I think it pays to drill down and really get something honed,
Hmm.
whatever that expertise is. I'm not saying I'm not
Sure.
prescriptive or anything. I'm more like,
Hmm.
I don't know. I think you might be better off doing what you do best and then
Hmm.
bring in everyone else. I mean, it's kind of what I've done in this
Yeah.
situation with us bringing in a new CEO. It's a someone that came from a much larger, 1.3 trillion under management
Yeah.
over the
It's
last
huge.
29 years, who really scaled a company from around 150-ish employees to like 4,000.
Wow. That's,
Not saying we want that many people, but you get the
sure.
idea. Am I the
Yeah.
best person to wear all these hats and continue? I've kind of taken it this far,
Hmm.
but in some ways we're like a 15-year old startup when you come into this scale. Like if you really want to scale this thing, maybe
Hmm.
it's better if I get out of the way and just do what I do best, which is usually
Hmm.
more on the capital side
Hmm.
than it is trying to be all these other things.
Sure. Yeah. And I do, it sounds like over the last few years, even before the very recent changes, sounds like PPR had already shifted toward focusing more on raising capital as opposed to managing assets. Is that true?
A very safe assessment. I mean, for many years we were asset managers. We still are in some cases, in some areas. But the percentage is shrinking dramatically and a lot is outsourced. But the good news is it's different when you're outsourcing it and you've done it versus I
Sure.
outsourced it
Yeah,
outsource it and
absolutely.
I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people don't know, like even in multifamily, a lot of people don't know that I raised capital previously for commercial real estate. And they also don't know that I was a contractor in commercial real estate
Right.
and
Right.
that I used to work in multifamily, 400 to 600 unit people were my customers. I used to do the turnovers. So it's a little different when you go to
Yeah.
look at assets and feasibility of the
Yeah.
projects and value add and things like that. New development. I was a guy that read blueprints and did estimates, and
Yeah.
it all that stuff that I didn't realize would come in handy later. Kind of
Hmm.
ironic how that works out sometimes. That
Yeah.
even my job in fast food, I was a fast food manager, when I was
Hmm.
18. You don't realize, you might go, if I said that to my grandson who's 17, he'd be like, oh,
Hmm.
I don't want to work there. But he doesn't realize you still learn systems, processes, checklists, all these
Sure.
things, how to open the store, how to close the books, how to do inventory, how to do this, even though you're at a fast food place, right? So
Right.
there's a lot of lessons that you're picking up at these various jobs, whether you're a self-employed contractor or whatever that is, that come along the way that
Yeah.
become valuable later, even though they may not appear to be related,
Yeah. There's still transferable skills and
transferable.
um, absolutely. No, that's great. So yeah, it's probably pretty tough for these operators and syndicators and different people, partners you're working with, for them to pull the wool over your eyes at this point, since you've got a lot of experience in a lot of different areas. So that
I mean,
that
it's
makes
still a
sense.
team sport, in fairness. I'm
Sure.
not trying to act like a know-it-all or anything.
Right.
It's there's areas that maybe I'm not the greatest underwriter or whatever. There's probably people better at it than me, or
Hmm.
various parts of the business, right? I'm not an engineer, right? I'm not going to pretend to be one, right? So
Right.
there's people and people, on teams that are very helpful. Could be on the
Yeah.
legal side, could be, the thing about commercial is it's definitely a team sport. There's plenty of room for multiple players on the team.
Hmm. That makes sense. No, I mean, we own some rentals, and I always recommend investors manage their own properties first. If it's every situation is different,
Yeah.
of course, but if my property manager is really dropping the ball, I'm going to know it.
And you got to
um,
jump in anyway, right? So it's like,
yeah. So, but I'm going to fire off a few questions here, and then we'll wrap it up.
oh boy.
So, what's one thing that people misunderstand about you, Dave?
Misunderstand about me. That's a good one. Jeez, I've never been asked that one. What do they misunderstand about me? Oh, maybe sometimes I'm being sarcastic, maybe, and they
Okay,
don't
so
know
that
it.
they don't pick up. Yeah, I get that one
Yeah.
too, because I I can be a little dry with my delivery. So it's like, hey, I'm going to
Does
be
he mean that,
sarcastic
or is
now.
he?
Yeah. That was a joke. Yeah, I can,
They don't get my bad jokes all the time.
Yeah. So that's good. What's one of your biggest regrets, failures? I know you don't want to use that term necessarily, but something that you'd like a do-over with.
It would probably utilizing that leverage idea sooner and younger than I did.
Mm-hmm.
I was, and then trying to be good at a lot of things. Like I'm
Sure.
never going to be that good at playing the guitar or speaking French or probably even golf. Like so why do
Right.
I put too
Why do you
much
try?
energy or effort in some of these places or something?
Mm-hmm.
When I could do something else, or
Sure.
you get the idea.
Yeah.
Or do I just focus on what I'm really good at and just go knock it out of the park? There's something to
Yeah.
be said for some of that. No, I don't mean don't ever try to improve yourself. I don't mean that, but
Sure.
I think
But that,
there's some truth to that.
yeah. And that goes hand in hand with the leverage, because the more you
We waste a
focus,
lot of time, I think, trying to do mediocre crap, right?
yeah, makes sense. If you could have coffee or a drink with any historical figure, who would you choose? They could
Wow.
still be alive today if you
Wow,
choose.
that's a good one. Oh, Jesus, maybe.
That's a good one. I like it. Yeah.
I don't know if he drank coffee, but
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe wine.
Maybe
But
wine. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, there's so many historical people. That's a good question. Um,
Well,
yeah, there's
it's
so
hard.
many. Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to beat the Jesus answer. Um, if you were given $10 million tomorrow, not saying you don't already have $10 million, but if somebody wrote $10 million check just
An
to
extra
you,
10.
an extra 10, what would you do with it?
It's funny you say that. Because I'm at a point in my life where it's like, it's funny. One of the books I just read was The Second Mountain, and
Oh,
it's looking at.
I'm literally
It's
reading
a
that
good
right
book, right?
now. It's great.
And yeah, I read that this year. I read quite a bit, but a lot of it's been around, what's your next, I don't like the word retirement, but it's really, what do you want to do next? What's more impactful, maybe? How can I do bigger things? And if you gave me $10 million, it would not materially impact my life right
Hmm.
now. So, and I don't mean that in a bad way or a
Yeah.
snotty
Well,
way.
I was
I
going
mean,
to, but I'm not going to now. So
uh,
I'm kidding. I was going to
so,
give you 10
so,
million.
so I would probably be looking at, what could I do pretty good with this that would be interesting, as opposed to some of the other folks. I mean, I'm sure everybody sees a lot of nonsense on different media channels of jumping in front of, private this and jets
Mhm.
and this and yachts
Mhm.
and all. That's just not me. I
Sure.
know some people, that's their thing. That's great. But I
Right.
just, because I always feel like maybe it's because of where I came from, that I just
Mhm.
feel like, no, I can help a lot of people with some of that.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's more rewarding for me to give than to get in a lot of
Yeah.
cases.
I love it. Yeah, real quick anecdote on the Second Mountain book. Somebody was messaging me a few weeks ago, and she said, I because she always asks for book recommendations at the end of the year, and we put out a list from all of our podcast guests. We said these are the book recommendations, and so she's messaging me and she says, "This book is amazing. I've got to give you so much credit. It was you who recommended this." And I said, confession, I haven't read that one. That was actually, it was Mark
Well, it's hard.
Podolsky
It's
who.
hard to read them all, isn't it? Yeah.
So yeah, so now I'm reading it because I feel obligated, but it's really good.
Yeah, it is good.
Um, Now I know you have a book you've already written. What's the name of that book, Dave? Do you
Real
remember?
estate note investing.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
If you had to write another book this year, what would that be about?
It's interesting. Um, Obviously, I raised a lot of capital, so that could be an interesting book. A lot of people want you to write a book on how to work with notes,
Hmm,
which is that's more of a ops thing or more of and I'm
sure,
not really the ops person either, but yeah, you could do that. And what other books could you give? That's a good question. Probably scaling a business or something, that kind
sure.
of thing.
I
Yeah.
like it.
Or right now, I'm like big into the board and the formation of really elevating the company and professionalizing the business. And, doing a gap analysis on like what board of advisors or board of directors, in my case, can
Hmm.
really elevate the company and really take us to another level. And I think that, that's something I look back on and that I should have done sooner, especially with, even if I couldn't afford board of directors, board of advisors sooner. Like, what was I thinking waiting? It's crazy that we wait.
So for somebody who's got a company that's a lot smaller than yours,
Yeah.
how would they, is it EOS or what would you recommend as far as
Well,
how do
yeah,
they
I mean, that's a
actually?
good place to start. I mean,
Mhm.
any of those types of outfits where, there's a dozen CEOs or whatever, they can be
Mhm.
your board of directors till you can actually get one. I just think they just don't stop their day to think about,
Mhm.
the advisors they could bring in. And even if you can't pay, you can always do a combination of, you know, modest compensation versus, sliver of equity or something. Really,
Mhm.
they're a board of advisors till there's equity involved. If there's equity, regardless of what you call them,
Mm.
well, once there's equity involved, then they're typically a board of directors. And then they have resources and network that you just don't have in areas that you
Mhm.
don't have. And you can really, catapult your business with some real strategic advice with someone that has a vested interest in helping you to do that. So it's like anything. Um, yeah, I strongly recommend that to folks that they
Mhm.
probably, I mean, I was guilty of it. I waited and dilly-dallied
Mhm.
and, didn't do it and look back and go, what were you thinking? Like,
Well, it's back to that. It's the leverage piece that you were already talking
or
about.
we
So,
just, yeah, I don't know what it is. We just don't realize that how much that can benefit us, because it
right.
really only takes a couple relationships or a couple of resources that could dramatically uptick the business.
Mhm.
I see a lot of businesses, they get to a certain stage and then they get stuck, and it's
Mhm.
like something's going to get them unstuck, and a lot of
Yeah.
times it is these types of advisors.
Well, it does take discipline, mental discipline to stop because there's always a fire to put out, like you alluded to earlier. It's
Yeah,
so to
sure.
stop and create that space to work on the business is easier said than done. But um, what's one, I guess, one thing about your looking back at your career, one thing that you didn't expect, kind of a big surprise in your industry, if you will.
Oh, well, Dodd-Frank was a big
That was
surprise
a big
to
one.
us. When we first started in the distressed debt space, it was a little bit of the Wild West, so you had a lot of freedom.
Sure.
And then that regulatory environment really got pretty stifling. What I didn't expect, that's a good question. Well, we also pivoted, right? So I didn't expect COVID. That was something
Yeah,
I didn't expect.
none of us did. Yeah.
So things like those types of small little black swan events like that
Right.
can, but the good news is that, if you have your act together and you can get through certain things, it's just a
Sure.
testament to the team or the company, that kind of thing. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, the one thing I did learn there is that we weren't as much as the issue as the government.
Mm.
They didn't handle the pivot very well,
Oh,
and you
right.
can see
No.
that with well, let's just take courthouse recording, right? I mean, half the
Yeah.
counties aren't even online, right? So
Yeah, it's
that's
ridiculous.
besides that being a disgrace, that's a structural problem. It's
Yeah.
probably still in effect, like where they're still,
Yeah.
I think in Pennsylvania, there's something like 67 counties or something. There's like 12 online, it's like,
It's crazy.
really? Like, do you realize the internet's here?
Well, that and the whole execution of like the PPP
Yeah.
loan program, but that's a whole
That's a whole
separate.
other story, right? Yeah, but my point was, it wasn't so much that we couldn't get through
Sure.
it's just you didn't have any support from the systems that you had to rely on just by
Hmm.
the nature of the business. So it was almost like their lack of readiness almost put additional parties. I'm sure they did. I'm sure they put other companies out of business.
Sure. Just a few more quick questions here.
Yeah, sure.
How has financial abundance made your life better?
Probably peace of mind. I never really worry about money. And I don't
Hmm.
know if it's a case of because I hadn't come from a lot, like
Hmm.
it's so I never really worry about it. And I always you know, obviously I believe in a higher power and things like that,
Hmm.
but I I do have that kind of mentality where, I'll just figure it out. I know that things will be okay, kind of thing.
Hmm.
So I don't, it's like Tony Robbins probably said it best. We don't lack resources. We lack resourcefulness.
I love
And
it.
I like
That's
that.
great.
I like that. I like that line. Like, it's like the acres of diamonds. They're all right in front of us,
Hmm.
And I believe that with anything as simple as nature. Like I like to read, like on a beach or in the mountains on a deck, or
Hmm.
like I like to be near nature. I feel close to God or the universe, whatever that is for
Hmm.
folks. And one of the things is there's no bad nature there or whatever, normally, unless it's a tornado or something.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's beautiful places, a lot of times you'll see people say, well, this place is more beautiful than this place. I'm like, yeah, maybe today it is. But there's plenty of beauty in the world. There's plenty of, we don't necessarily have to go 10,000 miles to find something beautiful. It might be right in front of our backyard or something, so that's my view on that. I mean, it's
Yeah. It's
weird,
great.
but
No, it's not weird. It's great.
beauty's all
I mean,
around us, right? So
absolutely. Just two more questions here.
sure.
How do you like to serve others?
Yeah, that's a good question. For a long time, my oldest son was in recovery, and me and him had owned a drug and alcohol recovery center for
Mm.
11 years, and nowadays he still owns one, but it's mainly because I was going off to do other things and things like
Mhm.
that. So that was very rewarding.
Mm.
And then we do a lot of charitable stuff, mostly on the homelessness side. I've
Mm.
done a lot with Project Home, which is in Philadelphia. So that's been, housing related, maybe just because of the
Mhm.
nature of all the businesses I had were housing
Sure.
related. And I always I always I really believe that the homeless problem we have is not really being addressed very well.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I look in other countries that don't really have it the way we do, like whether I'm in the
Mhm.
Netherlands or somewhere else, I'm like, why are we so messed up here?
Mhm.
Um, so I do look to that, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of reasons, obviously, but I just think there can be more work done, and there's some smart people that could put their heads together and help try to solve some of it anyway.
Sure. It's those are some very important causes, and I like to highlight that since I do believe entrepreneurship is a force for good, and we can. You've shown you can create wealth in your own life and make a very positive impact for others. So that's really good. Um, Last question: where can our listeners find you online? Sounds like they can't
Probably
call you.
can't call me. No, I don't mean it that way. That sounds pretty bad. No, you can reach me at PPR capitalmanagement.com, but the management is mgmt.com. Or you can reach me on Bigger Pockets. We also have a distressed mortgages group on LinkedIn. People ask questions periodically, especially on Bigger Pockets. We answer a lot of stuff for basically anything, and we try to answer them, almost daily. We answer stuff. So yeah, feel free to reach out. Always there to help other investors. I do believe that, and I do like what you said earlier. If you can think of ways to be more impactful in your investing, by all means, right? It's pretty easy if you think about it to go out and, we have a lot of things. We're fortunate. We're in a great place, a great country, things like that. We have a lot of resources that a lot of other folks in other places don't have. And it's just to be mindful that, we can, we don't always have to do this take mentality. We can,
Mhm.
there's plenty that we can do to give back and have an impact. I really encourage people to think about doing more impactful investing than just investing.
I love it, and it's really gets to the abundance mindset and an abundance approach that you clearly have, and that that we're trying to highlight on the show. So this has been
Yeah.
fantastic, Dave. I really appreciate your time. So thanks a lot for joining us.
No, my pleasure. Thank you, Jamie. Take care now.
Absolutely. Yep.
I'll see
And
you.
to our listener out there, thank you for spending your most valuable resources with us, and that is your time. Thanks, everyone. Take care.